Good evening, brethren, online. It's good to have you. We've got a few people here in the building. Anyways, we are in the book of Numbers. I was just asked if we had any notes. I hadn't actually put together any notes. When it comes time for the test, which will be in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Yeah, in 3 weeks, I will have notes for you that will primarily have to do with what is on the test, but we'll have a little outline for you, that kind of thing. But anyways, that will be in 2 weeks. I'll have them for you in 2 weeks. The test will be in 3 weeks. And as far as testing goes, still looking for some tests from those of you who are taking this class for a grade. I have the list in front of me. Dave sent me a list of everybody who's taken this class. Most of you are auditing it, but looks like we have 6 people that are taking it for a grade. Excuse me. I guess it's Eddie's test I've already graded, but other than that, I haven't seen or graded any tests. And I was just going to say, when did you send it?
I gave it to you class, but I finished the test. I handed it to you then.
That's right. It slipped my mind. Let me see. Let me take care of that for you. I'm sorry. It slipped my mind. But anyways, if you haven't, I apologize to Carl. But if you haven't given me that test, please get it back to me. Again, it was closed book by the honor system. I trust that you will honor that. One of my instructors' last question on most of his tests was, I have read all the material, true or false, I have read all the material assigned for this class. And then Revelation 21:8 right next to it. Anybody know what Revelation 21:8 points out? All liars shall have their part in the lake of fire. Not too many people got 100 in that class because everybody missed that question. Nah, most of us read the material. But anyways, yeah, please get that back to me when you can. Yeah, that's for tomorrow. I start a Jeremiah class here at the building tomorrow with Damien and Jet. Look forward to that. Kyle, you want to get started with a word of prayer?
Father God, thank you this evening for allowing us to be here to assemble in this class. Help us as we prepare ourselves to learn to receive your word. Bless our instructor. Bless those that are with us in our class, those who are present, those who are online. Bless those that are en route to be with us. Pray and ask us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Carl. All right. We unfortunately left off in Numbers 13 last week. And I say unfortunately because I like to do 13 and 14 together, since that is the central theme of the book of Numbers, book of failure, really. First generation did not make it into the promised land, and we learned last week why. Why did they not make it into the promised land? In general, but specifically, what's in 13?
Well, the spies said they couldn't, 10 of the 12 spies said they couldn't take the land even though God would give it.
Joshua and Caleb, most of us know the story. Joshua and Caleb are the only 2 faithful ones that said, we can take the land. The other 10 spies, which are listed in Numbers 13, beginning in verse 4, excuse me, on down to verse 15. These are the names of the men who Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua, not to be confused with Joshua, the son of Jehozadak. It says in the book of Haggai and Zechariah, Ezra and Nehemiah. Not sure if it's in Nehemiah or, anyways, yeah, Haggai and Zechariah. There's a Joshua is the son of Jehozadak. And the reason why I point that out is I went to a sermon one time, it's very early on, but the preacher was preaching from Haggai, and he likened the Joshua you meet in Haggai to Joshua right here, the son of Nun. What's the problem with that? First of all, they're not the same guy, and second of all, there's 1,000 years history between the two. Now, I don't expect the average Christian necessarily to know that, but when the preacher's up there and he's got the book of Haggai open and he keeps sounding like he's talking about this Joshua, the son of Nun, warning, danger, Will Robinson. But anyways, it was kind of fun that night. And I was looking around too. I don't even remember where I was. I was just visiting somewhere for some reason. But I was looking around at everybody, and I don't think anybody noticed. But anyways, there is a Joshua in the book of Haggai and Zechariah. It's not the same one. This is the Joshua we all know. But the key verse for me in chapter 13 is verse 2. Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, everyone a leader among them. So these were men of prominence. Who's Levites? I guess you didn't. It's a different list anyways. But yeah, the key phrase to me is the land which I am giving to the children of Israel. And you probably understand why that phrase is so significant to me. If God told you the land is already yours, why would you come back with a negative report? You might come back, if your faith is weak, with a challenging report. Lord, you better not leave us. Lord, there's no way I can take on Sihon or Og. They're giants. I'm going to need you every step of the way. Maybe you have that kind of weak faith, but to say it can't be done, what an insult. And remember, who's the very people that are saying it can't be done? The people that I witnessed coming out of Egypt and all the mighty signs that God did. You know, it gets repetitive sometimes, and particularly we've already studied Deuteronomy with Damien and where did it come up with? Oh, okay. Damien and Jet. We got a Jeremy at our congregation. Damien and Jet is Jeremy for some reason. But anyways, we've already studied Deuteronomy, and of course, the first section, God's constantly referring back to, I brought you out of Egypt with a mighty hand. That should never, be forgotten in the land of Israel, and yet the very same generation that experienced it came back with the negative report. I like verse 30. If you want to know what kind of character Caleb had, verse 30 of chapter 13, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once to take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is the land that devours its inhabitants. All the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak, came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight, scared to death of them, and they're mocking Israel, so to speak, like Goliath did with David. And you can imagine that these giants were as big as I suspect they were, that they did not fear Israel at all. Chapter 14, and all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried out. The people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, only we had died in Egypt, or if only we had died in the wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us up to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And verse 10 is pretty shameful. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel. And so as a response, Moses and Aaron fell on their faces. And just before they stoned Joshua and Caleb for actually having the kind of faith, and oh, by the way, pretty obvious when you read the Old Testament with New Testament eyes that the book of Hebrews, and particularly chapter 11, is right. All the heroes in the Old Testament were motivated by faith. Faith is the motivating factor beginning with Noah. Well, actually beginning with Cain and Abel. But faith is the motivating principle that is guiding all the Old Testament, which is why Paul points that out. The Hebrew writer points that out, but Paul points that out too. Why does Paul's use of Abraham? Remember in the first century, the Jewish Christians, insisting that Israel keep the law of Moses, circumcise your children. Okay, yes, we admit Jesus is the Son of God, but you still got to circumcise your children on the 8th day and keep the law of Moses. Why is bringing up Abraham such a stroke of brilliance? Talks about the faith of Abraham. Why was it genius for Paul to use Abraham as an example?
Obedience. That faith he did what God commanded him to do.
The argument being, you believe in Abraham, don't you? You exalt the name of Abraham, don't you? When did he keep the law of Moses? Abraham predates the law of Moses. So on what basis do you exalt Abraham? Same basis we exalt everybody, by faith. What basis do we exalt Joshua and Caleb right here? God told them he was giving them the land. They went in and spied it out, saw the very same giants, the very same fortified cities, all the very same strongholds that the other 10 spies said couldn't be taken. Joshua and Caleb said, we are well able to take it. And they were well able to stand up to them, even in the face of stoning. By the way, do not let that idea pass you by as far as just how significant that is. Do people bow to peer pressure? Anybody ever heard of the ash experiment? Interesting experiment. If I think of it, I'll bring you some notes about it. It's like goes back to the 1950s. Guy by the name of Solomon Ash put on a study. He was trying to see what kind of influence other people had on people. He had like 15 people in a room, and they were all supposed to, it was dubbed an optical test and visual judgments. See how good you are at visual judgments. And he had a series of whiteboards, and he had lines on them. Lines that were of he had one line on one side, and then on the other column he had 3 different lines of varying length. And the idea was, which of the 3 lines matches up with the example? Well, you would think that's all you're doing is, okay, A, B, or C. B is exactly like the example. That's the test. Problem was, what the people who were in the experiment, it was like 15 people there, but only one of them was being experimented. And he was the last one to get called on. And they would start off and everybody would give the correct answer. And you get down to the last guy. Well, of course it's B. But then slowly they started giving the wrong answers. And, this guy's sitting there listening, and he sees, okay, this one, it's C is the right answer. But 6 people in front of him said A was the right answer. Well, who are you going to believe? Your own lying eyes or these 6 people? And the point of the experiment was, even in something like optic, you would think I would not be persuaded that all of you say, a different line than my eyes tell me. I would go with my eyes. It's amazing how much influence people have on other people. That was one of the profound experiments about how we definitely influence one another for good or for ill. I like that in Philippians chapter 1 when Paul said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, my chains have turned out for the furtherance of the gospel, because the brethren see my boldness in the chains, and they are much more bold to speak the truth without fear. Paul's courage in the face of persecution was an inspiration to others. But anyways, so yeah, let's not underscore the tremendous pressure that would have been put on Joshua and Caleb, and yet they held firm. Verse 11, and the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me? With all the signs which I have performed among them, I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them. I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than that. And Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear it, for by your might you brought these people up from among them, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that you, Lord, are among these people, that you, Lord, are seen face to face, and that your cloud stands above them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you kill these people as one man, then the nations which have heard of your fame will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring this people in the land which he swore to give them, therefore he killed them in the wilderness. Now, it's strange that they would have interpreted it that way, but Moses is desperate here. And by the way, let that speak to the character of Moses. Why is Moses desperate here? That's not really the question I'm wanting you, or direction I'm trying to lead you in. Yeah, let me rephrase it. Or let me just say it a different way. When's Moses going to get to the end of his rope with these people? Why doesn't Moses say, you know what, Lord? That sounds like a good idea. Why don't you get rid of these people and make me a nation that will treat me a little bit better for all the sacrifice that I have done for this? Moses, of course, was tremendous sacrifice and tremendous persecution over and over and over again. And yet here he is pleading on behalf of the people once again. And by the way, I just heard a recent quote. It's pretty disappointing. 40% of the people that quoted responded they wouldn't go to war if we were attacked. That's one thing if it's an unjust war and you are a conscientious objector, but that wasn't the question. The question was, if we are attacked, you wouldn't go to war. You don't love your country that much? Stand shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, regardless of their political opinion, recognizing that we are all Americans and we are under attack. I'm willing to die for my country. And I also think that Zelensky has inspired some people, has he not? That's quite the quote, wasn't it? I don't need a ride, I need bullets. Send me some ammunition. I'm here to defend my country. It's kind of refreshing to watch in unison people say, I would rather die for my country. To live for a cause greater than yourself, which, by the way, isn't that what Christians are supposed to be about? We live for a cause greater than ourselves. It's nice and inspiring to watch people who actually live by that code. And unfortunately, everybody doesn't. But here's Moses. He's a patriot. He loves his people, even though his people have caused him incredible amounts of pain. Verse 17. And now I pray, let the power of my Lord be great, just as you have spoken. And by the way, I've got verse 18 highlighted, and I'll explain why in a minute. The Lord is long-suffering, and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression. But he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation. Now, why do I have that highlighted in particular? Anybody ever heard somebody say about the Old Testament God, he's vengeful and wrathful? I hear that every now and then. I don't like the Old Testament guy, he's full of vengeance, wrath, fury. Moses said he was long-suffering and abundant in mercy. Anybody remember why David in 2 Samuel chapter 24, when he took the ill-advised census, the sinful census, and God gave him three choices? I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what the three choices were. But God gave him three choices. You're chased by your enemies for 7 months or something. Forget the three choices that he gave him, but I remember his response.
What was the plague?
It was a plague. He could be chased by his enemies. The plague would last, I believe, 3 days. Yeah, I'd have to go back and read it to refresh my memory. But David's response is, anybody remember his response? Don't let me fall in the hand of man. Let me fall in the hands of God, for he's merciful. Anybody remember why Jonah didn't want to go preach to Nineveh? Well, a lot of times when you hear, preachers, teachers, whatever, commenting on Jonah, well, Jonah didn't want to go, and it's kind of understandable. Do you know how brutal the Assyrians were? Used to flay people, take their skins, and paint the wall with it. Yeah, where am I at tonight? Damien, sorry. I haven't seen you in a while, buddy. Sorry.
I learned earlier that they made pyramids out of heads.
Yeah, I mean, they would emphasize their brutality. I think it was them. It might have been Nebuchadnezzar, but I think it was the king of Assyria. When he got to the Mediterranean, he symbolically washed his swords in the Mediterranean Sea. Conquered everything as west as I can conquer. But that was the type of people they were. So a lot of times when preachers and teachers are talking about Jonah, they will point out just how pitiful or how barbarous, that's the word, how barbarous the Assyrians were, and no wonder Jonah didn't want the job. Well, there's another reason why Jonah didn't want the job, because he tells you in chapter 4, verse 2. So he prayed to the Lord and said, "Ah, Lord, was this not what I said when I was still in my country? Therefore I fled previously to Tarshish. For I know that you are a gracious and merciful God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, one who relents from doing harm." What's Jonah just said about himself? I wish you'd kill all these people, but I know you won't. These people repent, you'll let them alone. It's the last thing I want. That's why David said, I'd rather fall in the hands of God than in the hands of man. But my point with all three of those stories, beginning with Numbers 13 here, is biblical characters in the Old Testament seem to have a different opinion of God. By the way, I heard a Catholic priest in front of about 75 people. And it wasn't one of those situations where I could butt in. But he said, I hate the God of the Old Testament. He's vengeful and wrathful. In front of 70, and of course people are out there doing this. Because no one's ever read the Old Testament. Just read selected passages and pick the most brutal ones you can find. And you can make the Old Testament say just about anything you want if you don't take it in context. But anyways, Moses, David, Jonah had a different opinion of who God was. Patient, long-suffering, abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he by no means clears the guilty. Visiting the iniquity on the fathers, of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. What exactly does that mean?
The consequences of the father's sin will affect the father. Therefore, those effects, because it affects the father, will affect the children.
Daniel chapter 9, I won't make you turn there, but Daniel chapter 9. That's the chapter where Daniel is reading I'm trying to decide whether I should say this now or in about 5 minutes when we get to a different point where Daniel chapter 9 fills in real good. I'll just go ahead and say it. Daniel chapter 9, he's reading the Jeremiah the prophet, realizes that the captivity is about to end. Problem is, captivity is about to end and we're about to go home. Jerusalem is still in shambles and there is no temple. So he prays to God, shine on your sanctuary, which is desolate. That's the essence of his prayer. But if you read that prayer, it's marvelous in its details. And one of the details that it's marvelous in is, go ahead. That was what I was going to tie with this chapter right here, but that's we haven't read it yet, but we'll get right there. But he, one of the things he says early in the chapter, I forget what verse, but he said, you know, remember Daniel got taken captive as a teenager, removed from Jerusalem to Babylon, never to see Jerusalem again. He was castrated, made a eunuch, and spent his entire life praying towards Jerusalem. Anybody ever dealt with a teenager before? They don't handle change all that well. Can anybody say anything negative about Daniel? I mean, most biblical characters, there's at least one or two dark stories about him.
That's interesting. I never heard Daniel was a catcher. I heard somebody that Daniel married, bam, white.
Because that was generally what they did when they took him and put him in positions of importance, and particularly the harem, that kind of stuff. It doesn't say that, but just about every scholar concludes that it would have been the case. But anyways, point being, Daniel, not only is he reading Jeremiah, what does that tell you about his study habits? He's in Babylonian captivity. What's he doing? He's reading Jeremiah. But then in the prayer, he says that the curse that was written in the law of Moses has come upon us. And of course, he's talking about Deuteronomy 29 or 28 and 29, which we'll get to in a few weeks. Most of us know what we're talking about. Here's what happens if you're faithful to the law of Moses. God will bless you rising up, laying down, going out, coming in, bless your kneading bowl. He'll bless you every way you can be blessed. But if you don't keep the law of Moses, he'll curse you. And the Babylonian captivity is practically written in Deuteronomy 28 and 29. All the details of what will happen when the Jews do go into Babylonian captivity, they're there in chapter 28 and 29. Well, obviously, Daniel's read the law of Moses, and he recognizes that the Jews never lived by the law of Moses, and so it makes perfect sense to him that he's in Babylonian captivity, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why it's good to have faith. Because the reason why I mentioned him being a teenager is an awful lot of people, if the life that Daniel had to live, that they had to live, would have been better people. But Daniel knew who his God was and knew that God hadn't turned against him. Well, there's a curse written in the law of Moses, and our people never lived by the law of Moses. So it stands to reason that I would be in Babylonian captivity. It's good to have faith. Daniel certainly had great faith. Another thing I noticed too, that people kind of struggle. You guys remember the story of Shem, Ham, and Japheth after Noah got drunk? And Ham mocked his father after seeing him in a compromising position. Remember that story? Shem and Japheth took a sheet, went in backwards, and covered their father's nakedness, while Ham's outside laughing at what he'd just seen, disrespecting his father. That's what Ham does. Now, here's the interesting question. Very next verse, Noah places a curse on Canaan. Cain's not even born yet. Ham's the one that just disrespected his father. Why is a curse on Canaan? Because the apple don't fall far from the tree. You would not know that if you just, if you don't know anything about God and you're reading Genesis for the first time and you get to Genesis chapter 9 and it dawns on you, hey, wait a minute. Ham's the one that sinned. Why is there a curse on Canaan? It wouldn't dawn on you. But one of the beautiful things about our position is hindsight's 20/20. We've learned a lot about God on our way to the book of Revelation. And now when we come back to the law of Moses, or to the beginning of the Bible, if you will, you can start plugging in some of that stuff you know about God. And what do we know about God? You're not going to be held accountable for anybody's sins other than your own. And so sometimes you do suffer for other people's sins, but you are never guilty of other people's sins. And if you're Daniel, by the way, how much did Daniel love, Jerusalem? He would not stop praying even in the face of lions. But he never got to keep the feasts. He never got to sacrifice an animal down at the temple because there was no temple in his days. He never got to. Imagine you being COVID never releases, and you never come back to the church building. Your thoughts of the church building from this day forward are just your memories of being here, but you never see this place again. And you're alive for a long time. That would be very heartbreaking for Daniel. He never went up to Jerusalem to observe the feasts. Jerusalem didn't exist at the time of Daniel. But anyways, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation, pardoning the iniquity of this people, I pray according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. One more time, God, please forgive them. Verse 20, here's where it gets good. Then the Lord said, I pardon according to your word, but truly, as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. Because all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times, and have not heeded my voice, they certainly shall not see the land, which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him, and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn and move out into the wilderness by way of the Red Sea. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who murmur against me? You heard the murmurings which the children of Israel murmur against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will do to you. The carcasses of you who have murmured against me shall fall in this wilderness, all of you who were numbered according to your entire number from 20 years old and above, except for Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. You shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. But your little ones, whom you said would be victims, I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. But as for you, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years. Bear the brunt of your infidelity. There you go right there. The punishment on the next generation for the sins of the father. They're not guilty of it, but they're certainly bearing the brunt of their infidelity until your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days. For each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years. And you shall know my rejection. I, the Lord, have spoken this. I will surely do so to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me in the wilderness. They shall be consumed, and there they shall die. And I mentioned it before, but it bears repeating. Hebrews, particularly chapter 3 and verse 19, although it's not the only place that says it. What does the Hebrew write? I might even ask this on test. According to the Hebrew writer, why did that first generation die in the wilderness? One word. That's a good one word, but that ain't the one word. It's at least in the New King James Bible. Unbelief.
Faithlessness.
Faithlessness. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a synonym, but my Bible has unbelief, but faithlessness is unbelief. So you are absolutely right. But that's the word. And the point being, as I said, nobody in the camp of Israel, if you ask them if God exists, is going to say no. He's right over there in the cloud. But your actions define whether you have faith or not. And obviously the actions of these Jews in the wilderness showed a profound lack of faith. Book of James, Faith without works is dead. Here's another definition. What's the word death in one word? Definition of the word death. Separation. We die physically when our soul is separated from our body. We die spiritually when we're separated from God. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. And just in terms of what James said, whatever the object of your faith is, which should be God, but whatever the object of your faith is, just in general, if you don't have actions to back it up, your faith is dead. It's separated from the thing you claim to believe in. And so they will bear the brunt 1 year, 1 year for every day that they spied out the land. They spied out the land 40 years or 40 days. 40 years they shall bear the brunt. Can you imagine being a Jew? Just got that sentence on you? What do you do for the next 40 years? Yeah. So I mean they were lost.
What else gets me? That was they had left that land previously when they left Canaan to go to Egypt. They had left the land that belonged to them. So they lost it twice.
Yeah. What question did I just ask? I forget. Oh well, doesn't remember. Look at Daniel chapter 9 for a minute. To point out what Damien was just referring to. And as long as I'm making you turn to Daniel 9. Look at verse 11. In the middle of Daniel's prayer, he says, yes, all Israel has transgressed your law and has departed so as not to obey your voice. Therefore, the curse and the oath written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, has been poured out on us because we sinned against him. And by the way, that just backs up the point I was making. Daniel understood completely why he was in captivity. But you know what else I like about verse 11? This is what I mean. This prayer is an incredible model. Look at the last phrase again. Because we have sinned against him. We? Excuse me, Daniel, did you say we? What did you do, Daniel? You know what the answer is? Nothing. Israel had listened to me and we would have never been in this shape. What's my point? Lord, save us from these liberals. Lord, save us from these conservatives. You get the idea in America these days that it's us against them. Isn't it supposed to be we? Daniel is suffering mightily. He didn't do any of these things. It's been real easy for Daniel to take a dim view of his fellow man, because if it wasn't for his fellow man, he wouldn't be in this shape. He deserves to be in Jerusalem. But of course, he's not. And so my only point is, Daniel's quite the patriot. But anyways, as I said, his prayer is basically verses 17 and 18. Now therefore, our God, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplications for the Lord's sake. Cause your face to shine on your sanctuary, which is desolate. O my God, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolations, and the city which is called by your name. For we do not present our supplications before you because of our righteous deeds, but because of your great mercies. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and act. Do not delay for your own sake, my God. Your city and your people are called by your name. A marvelous prayer, so marvelous that what's the answer to Daniel's prayer? Gabriel shows up. Message from heaven. Are you Daniel? I got a message from God. By the way, you're greatly beloved. But Daniel gets more than he bargains for. What is the essence of Daniel's prayer? He recognizes that if the Jews are about to go home, Jerusalem's in shambles. God, you need I don't know how you do it, God, but man, we need a temple and we need a city. It doesn't exist anymore. God shows up and Gabriel says, I'm going to give you more than you bargained for. Not only am I going to tell you about going home, I'm going to give you the rest of Jewish history. When did Jewish history stop? Trick question. Jewish history never stopped. There's Jews with us today. Got a map? You never watch TV? Israel is alive and well today. Israel stopped in AD 7. Your purpose was to bring forth the law of Moses, to bring forth the Messiah, the Savior, the answer for all the world's sin. And when he came, you rejected him. God was merciful and didn't abandon you immediately. Sent the apostles out for 3.5 decades until finally, after rejecting them, following Paul from town to town, persecuting him everywhere he went, finally God turned the lights out on Jerusalem. Good night. Your purpose is over. And this prayer, Gabriel's answer to Daniel's prayer is basically covering the rest of Jewish history from the time the Jews leave Babylon to go home and rebuild Jerusalem until AD 70. That's the essence of what's in chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. I'm not going to go through it because we're not studying Daniel, but I do want to point out, look at verse 24. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. 70 weeks. How many days is that? 7 weeks in a day? 490 days. There are 3 waves of Jews that went home from Babylonian captivity. 536, Cyrus let the first wave go home. 457, Ezra led a wave home. And then in 444, Nehemiah led a wave home. 457. Anybody want to do the math? Subtract 490 and 457. What do you get? 33.
I do the math.
That's when Jesus was crucified.
Oh, at age
The
30.
math works out perfectly. The point we're making is 70 weeks is 490 days. I'll be the first to admit Daniel never says what God said in the book of Numbers, which is a day for a year. But the math works out so perfectly from the time Ezra led a wave home in 457 that I believe that's exactly what we're talking about. Damien?
I think Margaret had something.
Yeah, she was trying to get in. What was you going to say, Margaret? Can she hear me? Well, obviously she can hear me.
She turned her mic on.
Oh, okay. Well, tell her to chime in if she turns it back on. Margaret, if you turn your mic back on, I'm ready for you. Anyways, go ahead.
Turned her mic on.
Okay. Well, if she jumps in, that's fine. I do want to look at verse 20. As long as we're... Margaret, have you got something to say? I wonder if her microphone's weird or something.
No, I have nothing to say right now.
Okay. We thought you were trying to get in. But anyways, again, Daniel does not say that 490 days should be transferred to 490 years, but we do have the book of Numbers that God obviously did that at one point in time with the Jews wandering in the wilderness. And since the math works out so perfectly from Ezra leading a wave of Jews home, that we can't help but think that that's exactly what we're supposed to do with this. He's going to describe the next 490 years, which leads you to the cross. 70 weeks are determined, 490 years for your people and your holy city. Now, if I'm right, and I feel quite strongly I am, what does he mean for your people and for your holy city? It means in 490 years, there's no such thing as a Jew in heaven. We got Jews all over the earth. But in heaven, in 490 years, you're done. Because your purpose, and by the way, if you're a Jew, that shouldn't be offensive. Because you know what? If you're a Jew, you know what you should be saying to yourself? I want to be whatever God wants me to be. If that's his son, now my name's Christian, fine with me. Goodbye, Judaism. Does anybody here mind saying goodbye to their former life before they became a Christian? Shouldn't be hard for a Jew either. Everybody has to say goodbye to their former life. So even as though that might sound offensive on the surface, I don't think it is to a faithful person. But anyways, 490 years are determined for your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin. Now, how can you make an end of sin and finish transgression? Where's the only place on earth that sin has been once and for all dealt with? In the church.
Jesus' death on the cross.
You got it. That's exactly what Daniel's talking about. To make an end of sins. The Old Testament, your sins kept being rolled forward. You had to keep offering those sacrifices, but Christ's sacrifice made an end of sins. To make reconciliation for iniquity. Once again, that's what the blood of Christ does. To bring in everlasting righteousness. And here's why I wanted to go ahead and read it anyways. To seal up vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. And of course, Jesus is prophet, priest, and king. What are the only three offices in the Old Testament that were anointed? Prophet, priest, and king, and Jesus is all three. But the phrase I really want you to notice is to seal up vision and prophecy. What does that mean? Well, I can't stress this one enough in the world that we live in today.
Once you have Christ comes, they don't need to prophesy. It's coming.
All the Old Testament prophecies are going to be fulfilled in 490 years. Prophecy will be sealed up. One last passage, as long as I open this can up, look at Luke 24. Jesus, just before he's already resurrected, just before he ascends to heaven. Luke 24, verse 44. Then Jesus said to them, the apostles, these are the words which I spoke to you while I was with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms concerning me. And he opened their understanding that they might comprehend the scriptures. He thus said to them, thus it was written, and thus it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead the third day, and that repentance and remission of sin should be preached in his name to all the nations, beginning at Jerusalem. You are witnesses of all these things. And of course, the key phrase that I'm zeroing in on is all things concerning me in verse 44. One of the chief things I would ask you to look for. Sometimes people get intimidated. You're watching TV, particularly because since you don't go to a church where you're going to hear premillennial ideas, you're not hearing them here, I know. The only place you're going to hear them is if, like you're watching TV. There's a commercial on a station I watch all the time. Anybody know who John Hagee is? Premillennial preacher out of San Antonio. Well, he's doing a good work right now. Guess what he's doing? Gathering up supplies for the Jews of the Ukraine. Anybody argue with that? I do have a couple questions for you, though, with all due respect, John Hagee. Why are you only concerned about the Jews? All kinds of people over there suffering right now. Why do they have to be Jews? Why do you think John Hagee's got a special place in his heart? Remember, he's a Christian preacher, got a national audience. He's famous. San Antonio, Texas. Why is he especially minded of the Jews in Ukraine right now?
Concerned about the premillennial, the Jews' new kingdom in Jerusalem.
And the main thing is, he thinks that Jews still have a place in God's future. And remember, does anybody know what Romans 11, verse 26 says? Be careful of this passage. And so all Israel shall be saved. Now, scholars trip over that one because that's tough. passage. I think I understand it, but that is a difficult passage. Well, some people take it for what it looks like it's saying. Days coming when all Israel shall be saved. So guys like John Hagee, because they think Israel still has a future in God's plan, they are particularly mindful of the Jews. That's why God bless Israel. I think that's how the commercial ends. And again, I got no problem with the good work he's doing for the Jews in Ukraine. They certainly need the help, but they're not alone. There's a lot of people that are suffering over there in the same boat. 11:26, I believe. Possible it could be 25, but I think it's 26. Yeah, all Israel shall be saved. But here's what I want you to notice. A lot of the prophecies, unless you study prophecy on a regular basis, they're not easy to discern what's being said. Notice this when you're watching somebody on TV and he's quoting the prophets from the Old Testament. Ask yourself this question. Is he applying the prophecy to the first coming of Christ or to the second coming of Christ? And if he's applying it to the second coming of Christ, I almost guarantee you he's wrong. Just about everything written in the Old Testament prophets was speaking of the first coming of Christ. To the Old Testament prophets, the great day that lie ahead was not heaven. It was the rise of the Messiah and his kingdom, the king and the kingdom. That's what they were looking at. In Daniel there, chapter 9 backs it up. Seal up vision and prophecy. So anyways, we can go back to Numbers now. I do believe that 70 weeks is a 490-year reference. But anyway, that's a fascinating chapter right there. But verse 33, Numbers 14. Actually, I read that already. Verse 36. And the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation murmur against him by bringing a bad report of the land, those very men who brought the evil report about the land died by the plague before the Lord. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive of the men who went to spy out the land. And I asked you the question, what about the people that wandered the wilderness for 40 years? Could you have repented? Still been saved? I don't see why not. I don't see any evidence anyone did. But my point being, the 10 spies you were listening to just dropped dead in front of your eyes. You supposed to learn anything from that? Moses didn't get to go into the promised land, as all of us know. Aaron didn't get to go into the promised land. These people that died in the wilderness could have lived in the wilderness in a repentant state and still been saved. And again, I don't see any evidence that any of them did, but there was no reason for them to be eternally lost, even though they died in the wilderness. And they certainly could have learned the lesson by the 10 spies dying. Anyway, then Moses, verse 39, then Moses told these words to all the children of Israel, and the people mourned greatly. And they rose early in the morning and went up to the top of the mountain, saying, here we are, and we will go to the place which the Lord had promised, for we have sinned. You see what's going on in verse 40? Suddenly,
Now I want to go.
Suddenly now I want. Some people just never get anything right. When the time is right, they're not ready. And when the time is wrong, now they're all ready. Verse 41. Then Moses said, now why do you transgress the commandment of the Lord? For this will not succeed. Do not go up, lest you be defeated by your enemies, for the Lord is not among you. The Amalekites and the Canaanites are there before you, and you shall fall by the sword, because you have turned away from the Lord. The Lord will not be with you. But they presumed to go up to the mountaintop. Nevertheless, neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses departed from the camp. And the Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwell on that mountain came down and attacked them and drove them back as far as Hormah. And of course, they just weren't going to learn. And so that's your key chapter right there. Ain't much. What do we learn about the first generation from this point forward?
Green Mile.
What's that?
Green Mile.
The Green Mile?
Green Mile.
Yeah. You get to chapter 20. We're in the 39th year. I don't think most people realize the passage of time between this chapter right here, 14, and Numbers 20. By the time you get to Numbers 20, Miriam dies in the 39th year, and she dies in chapter 20, verse 1. Point being, they wandered the wilderness for 30 years. What'd they do? Who knows? Nothing's recorded. Why is nothing recorded? Because if you don't want to be a part of God's plan, don't be surprised when God don't think about you. Always kind of fascinates me. Do you think that when Jesus died, he made the front page of the Roman Times Picayune? Think anybody in Rome cared because a carpenter from Nazareth got nailed to a cross way over on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, a place called Jerusalem I'm never going to visit. I live in the Emerald City or the Eternal City. Yeah, not a big deal in Rome. But according to the world, what is the center of the world 2,000 years ago? Rome. What's Jerusalem? Who cares? It's where the Jews live. That's funny because when I read the Bible, I get the idea that Jerusalem's the center of the world. Rome's an afterthought. Because God's thoughts are not our thoughts, neither are our ways his ways. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so are my thoughts than your thoughts, or my ways than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Chapter 15, we're not going to go through because he is restating some of the principles of laws, if you will, of the offerings. Sometimes he's filling in the blanks. Remember, it's kind of like the New Testament, the Gospels, and the letters. You know, they come in piecemeal and they fill in the blanks. You know, there are some things you may not have known until the book of 1 Corinthians showed up. Now that you got 1 Corinthians, knocks out a whole lot of things that I didn't know before I got that book. And that's kind of how truth trickled in. And the same thing is true with the law of Moses. Not everything that they got in the book of Exodus, or the law of Moses, let's put it this way, didn't come complete here by first 5 books of the law of Moses, hot off the press, is all written at the same time. Moses wrote them throughout the period of the wilderness wandering. So a lot of things are restated because the second generation needs to hear them. Remember what I told you about the 10 Commandments? Why the 10 Commandments appear in both Exodus 20 and again in Deuteronomy 5? Because in Exodus 20, they were spoken to the first generation that we just saw died or is going to die in the wilderness. Deuteronomy 5, they'll be spoken to the second generation. So you see some of that right here. The first generation's fading off because we ain't got much more to say about them. God has already rejected them. So he gives us, fills in some blanks on the offerings. Verse 22, let's read that though. Chapter 15, verse 22. And if you sin unintentionally and do not observe all these commandments which the Lord has spoken to Moses, all that the Lord has commanded you by the hand of Moses from the day the Lord gave commandment and onward throughout your generations, then it will be, if it is unintentionally committed without the knowledge of the congregation, the whole congregation shall offer one young bull as a burnt offering, as a sweet aroma to the Lord. It's grain offering, drink offering, according to the ordinance. 1 kid of the goats of the sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for the whole congregation of the children of Israel, and it shall be forgiven them. For it was unintentional. For they shall bring their offering, an offering made by fire to the Lord, sin offering for the Lord, for their unintended sin. It shall be forgiven the whole congregation of the children of Israel, and the stranger who sojourns among them, because all the people did it unintentionally. And if a person sins unintentionally, he shall bring a female goat, first year as a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for the person who sins unintentionally, and sins unintentionally before the Lord, to make atonement for him. It shall be forgiven him. You shall have one law for whom sins unintentionally, both for him who is native born among the children of Israel and for the stranger who sojourns among you. Why we got so much attention to unintentional sin? And what does it mean, unintentional sin? Law's just been given. There's a lot of circumstances in life where you find yourself saying, I'm not sure what the law means, right, or what the law says right here. People that have difference of opinion, the law is just being written, just being applied to everyday life. So there's still a lot of questions that people aren't real sure about. And so you could find yourself in that situation doing things that, oh, wait a minute, the law says I can't do that. Or, being unclean. You didn't know that was the law yet or whatever. There's a lot of unintentional sin that could have happened. But not all sin was unintentional. Verse 30, but the person who does anything presumptuously, whether he's native born or a stranger, that one brings reproach on the Lord, and he shall be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of the Lord, has broken his commandment. That person shall be completely cut off. His guilt shall be upon him. Now, while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron, to all the congregation. They put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, the man must surely be put to death. So all the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So as the Lord commanded Moses, all the congregation brought him outside the camp, stoned him with stones. And he died. Boom. Working on the Sabbath. Don't do that. Death sentence. Even for something that small. And why do you think God would? It seems kind of harsh. Why do you think right here God is? That's the sentence. Don't play with it. Don't play with it. No working on Sabbath. So even though that infraction in the grand scheme of things seems a little small, just gathering sticks, but like Uzzah touching the ark. I gotta believe Uzzah had nothing but the best intentions when he studied the ark. He was just trying to keep the ark from falling. Nope, struck him dead. We're serious here. You don't touch the ark. You don't work on the Sabbath.
Did they stone him another day, or would that be more throwing the stones?
That's a good question that I don't have the answer to. Yeah, it's a good question. I do not think that would have been considered work, but I don't know whether they would have taken him immediately and done that or not. Let me read that again. Obviously, he's under guard in verse 34 until basically he has a trial. It does not say, it's hard to say exactly how much time passed, but that's a good question. If I get to the bottom of it, I'll let you know. I do know at the time of Christ that one of the things that made Christ's arrest illegal, well, it was a bunch of things, but one of them was what day of the week was he crucified? Friday, day before the Sabbath. What day was he arrested? Same day. The Jews never arrested somebody in a capital offense. Or let's say it another way. A capital offense, if you were arrested for a capital offense, it had to be a 2-day trial. So a trial for a capital offense never started on Friday because you obviously couldn't hold the second day of the trial on Saturday, the Sabbath. So they never started a death sentence on Friday. So that's one of the ways that Jesus had his justice taken away, as Isaiah said. But to answer that question, I do not know the answer off the top of my head. But that was at the time of Christ. I don't know about right here at the beginning of the law of Moses. Let's finish the chapter. There's one more interesting story, I guess. Verse 37. Again, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners. You shall have a tassel, that you may look upon it and remember all the commandments that of the Lord, and to do them, that you may not follow the harlotry with which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined, and that you may remember to do all my commandments and be holy for your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. Anybody got a reference in either verse 38 or 39 to Matthew 23:5? What's that say?
Mark the borders of the garments.
What does it mean in Matthew 23 when he said you make your phylacteries broad and large and you make the...
They're showing off. They're trying to show how eyes are out.
What are phylacteries?
Oh, that's thousands.
But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. Obviously, the enlarge the borders of their garments comes from this passage right here. And of course, what were they doing? Making them so that they could be easily seen by men.
Religious things they wear robes, special robes for their preaching.
Mm-hmm.
And even the band collar, I don't know why they came up with that's a difference. It said that's so far apart to be seen as a religious person.
I don't even know where that white collar come from. What I do know is if you buy a black Nero shirt that has no collar like this and just buttons up, people will call you priest. Because I wear one, and that's, how you doing, Father? Somebody's always giving me a hard time. It's like, man, I bought this shirt at JCPenney's for $15. But anyways, yeah, I don't know where that came from. But the phylacteries were actually leather boxes that Jews wore on their forehead, and usually on their right arm they would put scriptures in it, and particularly Deuteronomy 6. We'll say more about it when we get to Deuteronomy. But hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So anyways, obviously you can see by the time of Jesus, they had perverted that ideal right there. Something that should remind you of being faithful to God and his law, the Jews had turned into a way to show off in front of the people.
I guess that's also like in the movie Fiddler on the Roof, or other times you see the Jewish men, their vest tassels coming down.
Start that over again.
Okay, well, I saw it in the movie, Fiddlers on the Roof, but you see other Orthodox Jewish men, you know, you see pictures of them aware in the news. It's like their vest, the lower part of the vest,
It's got tassels on it.
Straight cut. It's got tassels hanging down.
And this is where it comes from, right here. Where does the curl come from? Do not cut the corners of your beard. So the Jews, to make sure they didn't get cut, would do that with the corners of their beard. Hasidic Jews, see them in New York City a lot. All right, it's 7:10. I don't want to start chapter 16 at 7:10, so let's take a break. We'll see you at 7:30. It's 7:29. Chapter 16. Now, this is one chapter that does talk about the generation that died in the wilderness. Now, it's been a couple of weeks ago, so you may not remember it, but I pointed it out when we got there. This, of course, is the story of Korah and his miscreant friends that try to usurp the authority of Moses. Most of us probably know exactly how this chapter ends. Let's read first three verses. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath. Who's Kohath? Son of Levi. But Aaron came from Kohath, and the priests come from Kohath. So that means Korah is a son of Kohath. the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the son of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men. Reuben, if you don't remember, was Jacob's firstborn. Obviously, Levi was Jacob's thirdborn in the priestly tribe. Korah comes from the priestly tribe. Verse 2, and they rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown, and they gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the congregation of the Lord? So, Korah is leading a rebellion, trying to usurp authority away from Moses. Korah is the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath. I wrote right next to that verse, chapter 3 and verse 30. Look back at chapter 3 and verse 30, if you will. Chapter 3, verse 27, the census of the Kohathites. Turns out there were 8,600 keeping charge of the sanctuary. Look at verse 30. And the leader of the father's house of the families of the Kohathites was Elzaphan, the son of Aziel. Now, why do you think in number 16, Korah, the son of Issachar, the son of Kohath, why do you think I would write that passage down right next to Korah? Chapter 3 and verse 30. And the leader of the father's house with the families of Kohath, of the Kohathites, was Elzaphan, the son of Aziel. Anybody want to take a guess why that gets my attention?
Same man. Same father.
No. They're both Kohathites, but different people. Because in chapter 3, verse 30, who's chosen as the leader of the Kohathites? Elzaphan, the son of Aziel. That's a nice honor. Who else is from the tribe of Kohath? Why not me? You get what I'm getting at here? Look who steps up to the plate. Moses, you take too much authority upon yourself. Korah, a Kohathite. Why didn't he get that honor back in chapter 3, verse 30? A lot of scholars believe that Korah had an attitude. He saw, what was his name, Elzaphan, getting an honor he thought belonged to him. And that probably ate at his craw. And I've heard more than one elder in my 25 years get charged with thinking he runs this place. What happens sometimes with elders and leaders that are very hands-on and get things done? They hear that charge from time to time. Here's Korah. Obviously, he's got a bad heart, so the theory sounds pretty good to me that he probably felt slighted that he wasn't the leader of the Kohathites. And now he's challenging Moses, along with Dathan and Abiram from the tribe of Reuben. They're charging Moses with taking all the authority upon themselves.
Be over all the tribes, not just.
What's that?
He sort of wants to be over all the tribes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Verse 4, so when Moses heard it, fell on his face. He spoke to Korah and to his company, saying, tomorrow morning the Lord will show us who is his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him, that one whom he chooses, he will cause to come near to him. Do this, take censers, Korah and all your company, put fire in them, put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow, and it shall be But the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the Holy One. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi. Then Moses said to Korah, hear now, you sons of Levi. Is it a small thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the work of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation, to serve them? And he has brought you near to himself, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi with you. And are you seeking the priesthood also? What's the argument Moses is making it? Some people are never happy. No matter what you give them, they always want something more. Aspiration is just never seems to be satisfied. Tremendous ego. Therefore, you and your company, verse 11, are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron that you murmur against him? Moses called Dathan and Abiram, son of Eliab, but they said, we will not come up. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. Sounds like they knew trouble was happening if they come up, but they weren't about to come up and find that out. But it's kind of sad that they think Moses didn't lead them into the promised land already. Why are they not in the promised land?
They rejected it.
They rejected God, and yet this is how, unfortunately, how unfaithful people work. One of my favorite proverbs: the foolishness of a man twists his way, and then his heart frets against the Lord. You don't pay any attention to what God would have you to do, then you get yourself in a mess, and suddenly you're blaming it on God. Verse 15. Then Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, do not respect our offering. I've not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt any one of them. Moses said to Korah, tomorrow you and all your company be present before the Lord, you and they, as well as Aaron. Each of you take a censer and put incense in it. Each of you bring a censer before the Lord, 250 censers. You also, and Aaron, each of you with a censer. So every man took a censer, put fire in it, light incense on it, stood at the door of the tabernacle of meeting with Moses and Aaron. Korah gathered all the congregation against them at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. And the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell on their faces and said, O God, God of all spirits, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and you be angry with all the congregation? So the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the congregation, saying, get away from the tents of Korah, Dathan and Abiram. Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him, and he spoke to the congregation, saying, depart now from the tents of these wicked men, touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. So they got away from around the tents of Korah, Dathan, Abiram. Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents with their wives, their sons, and their little children. Then Moses said, by this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own will. If these men die naturally, like all men, or if they are visited by the common fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord. And it came to pass, as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground split apart under them, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, and with all the men with Korah, and with all their goods. So they and all those who with them went down alive into the pit. The earth closed over them, and they perished from among the congregation. Then all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, "Let the earth swallow us up also." What an incredible scene. And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell Eleazar the son of Aaron, the priest, to pick up the censers out of the blaze, for they are holy, and scatter the fire some distance away. The censers of these men who sinned against their own souls, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the altar, because they presented them before the Lord. Therefore they are holy, and they shall be a sign to the children of Israel." What does that mean? They shall be a sign to the children of Israel.
See them, know where they came from.
Yeah. You're going to cover the altar of incense. There's an ominous warning for you. What's the altar of incense covered with? The altars of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, who were swallowed alive by the earth because they tried to usurp the authority of Moses. That ought to get your attention. So Eleazar, verse 39, the priest took the bronze censers, which those who were burned up had presented, and they were hammered out as a covering on the altar, to be a memorial to the children of Israel, that no outsider who is not a descendant of Aaron should come near to offer incense before the Lord, that he might not become like Korah and his companions, just as the Lord had said to him through Moses. What's this? Test questions from this chapter. Number one, what did they do with the censers? Keep that in mind when it comes time for the test. Number two, what is the sin? What's the great sin that's being committed in this chapter? Look at 1 Timothy chapter 2. In case you don't already know this, look at 1 Timothy 2, verse 1. Therefore I exhort, first of all, that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and givings of thanks be made for all men. Now, I'm not a big Greek or Hebrew scholar. I don't know much of anything about Hebrew or Greek, but sometimes it's very handy to know the Greek words there. The Greek word for men in verse 1 is anthropos, which is mankind, where we get the term anthropology from. For kings and for all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. There's pretty good reason to pray for leaders in authority, whether you like them or not. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. There's one mediator, or one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus. It's amazing how many times you can quote that to a Catholic and they still don't get. You know, they'll nod and say amen after you say, we only got one mediator, and that's Jesus, and they'll say amen. Mother Mary, and start doing the beads. Like, man, make a connection, would you? But anyways, verse 5, there's one God, one mediator between God and men, man Christ Jesus, who gave himself a ransom for all, to be testified in due time, for which I was appointed a preacher and apostle, speaking the truth in Christ, not lying, teacher of the Gentiles, faith and truth. Therefore I desire that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. Notice the men in verse 1 is anthropos. Verse 8, the word translated men is andros, which means what? Male. Means male. Paul is I mean, sometimes men is translated mankind, mankind includes women. But in this particular case, if he'd have chosen anthropos, he might have left the door open, even though I think he's about to shut it here in a minute. But if he had written the word anthropos, you could make the argument that men and women could be praying. But he said, I want the males to lead these prayers. Verse 9, in like manner also the women adorn themselves in modest apparel with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women, professing godliness with good works. Let a woman learn in silence. By the way, I've got silence highlighted. And then I've got verse 2, the word peaceable highlighted. You know why that gets my attention? Verse 2, peaceable, and verse 11, silence. The same Greek word. And here's my point. To the woman who thinks that the silence there means you could never speak, I respect that opinion. And if you're trying to please God, God bless you for trying to please Him. But I don't think that's what it means. And the reason is because the same Greek word that's translated silence in verse 11 is translated peaceable in verse 2. And here's my question. Do you think we're supposed to pray for leaders so that we can lead quiet lives without ever saying anything? So we can all be mute for the rest of our lives? Obviously, peaceable does not mean you don't talk. In the same way, silence I don't think means absolute silence for a woman. Obviously, you're commanded to sing. You're commanded to make your confession just like men are. I don't have any problem with women asking questions in class. Not a problem for me. I don't have a problem with women answering questions in class. But here's where it gets, where we should get our attention. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. And again, I don't think that silence means you can never say anything. But obviously, what is Paul forbidding? He's forbidding women to teach or have authority over a man. So when the saints come together, Paul said, he wrote these things in chapter 3, verse 15, that you may know how to conduct yourselves in the house of God. So obviously, does not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. I'm sure everybody here understands that, nothing new. Here's the only thing I wanted to point out a couple things, but one thing I would remind you, what do you think the argument is for a lot of people when they say, when you point this passage out to them, they got a woman preacher?
Cultural back then.
Cultural. It's a cultural argument. 2,000 years ago, things were a lot different, but in today's world, anything a man can do, a woman can do better. Well, I don't have a problem with the cultural argument. Well, let me rephrase that. There are times when I accept the cultural argument, but I don't accept it here. Do you know why? Look at what he says next. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. He gives two reasons why women aren't to have authority over men. What are they?
Adam was first. Eve was deceived.
He points to the origin of man. Man first, woman created for man, 1 Corinthians 11. And then woman sinned first. So he gives you two reasons that have nothing to do with culture. They have everything to do with origins. From day one, when sin entered the world, from day one, well, actually, Adam was formed first, and he has authority over you. And also, to give you a second reason, Eve was deceived first. And so the point simply being that neither one of those reasons has anything to do with culture. It has everything to do with origins. But the real reason I read this is, what did God think of Korah when he tried to usurp authority from Moses? What happened to Korah? Anybody want to meet a similar fate? I remember speaking of good old Florida. You hear about it all the time, but one day when we were still living there, Some guy was sitting in his living room watching TV and a sinkhole opened up, took his whole trailer. He went down alive into a sinkhole, never to be seen again. You hear about sinkholes in Florida all the time, but you don't hear about people literally dropping into a sinkhole, never to be seen again, but it happened. But Korah and Dathan and Abiram, 250 men, got swallowed alive for what sin? Usurping authority. I'd like to read Dr. Joyce Myers. Most people want to read her 1 Timothy chapter 2. I don't. I want to read her Numbers chapter 16. For her own good, by the way. Not just because I like to pick a fight, but you better pay attention. You don't teach or usurp authority over a man. God's serious about that. God's serious about authority. Korah tried to steal authority that God rightly put in Moses' hands, and by rightly, I mean, first of all, God did it, so why would you argue it? But second of all, it was God's will that Moses had that authority. He did not give it to Korah, and that's the price they paid. Now, does anybody know before? Well, actually, we're not done with the chapter, so never mind. Verse 41. Next day, all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." Yeah, these people are amazing. And by the way, well, no, but these people are amazing. Now, it happened when the congregation had gathered against Moses and Aaron that they turned towards the tabernacle of meeting, and suddenly the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of meeting. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from among the congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces. Here we go again. So Moses said to Aaron, "Take a censer, put fire in it from the altar, put incense on it, take it quickly to the congregation, make atonement for them, for wrath has gone out from the Lord, the plague has begun." Then Aaron took it as Moses commanded and ran into the midst of the congregation, and already the plague had begun among the people. So he put in the incense and made atonement for the people. And he stood between the dead and the living, so the plague was stopped. Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the Korah incident. So Aaron returned to Moses at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, for the plague had stopped. So I guess you could round it up to 15,000 people died in this usurpation of authority. I think God's pretty serious about authority. Don't usurp authority. If you have two elders and one of them resigns, how many elders you got? None. If you have two elders and none of them resign, or one of them resigns, and those two men think it's time to get a new preacher, what do? Well, if you don't have a congregational meeting, then I imagine, if you don't have elders, imagine you would either call a men's meeting or you would call a congregational meeting, but at the very least, you would call a men's meeting and say, "Hey, it's my considered opinion that maybe it's time to move on. What say you?" And if the congregation decides, "Yeah, you might be right," so be it. What would you think of those two men if they continued to act like elders and told the preacher he was fired without talking to anyone else? And why do you think I'm talking about it at this place in the scripture? You better be careful you start messing with authority you don't have. Serious business. Taking authority that is not yours. Unfortunately, sometimes people are that one. By the way, the story I just told you, it happened. Two men that weren't elders, two men that were elders, one of them resigned, but you'd never know it by their behavior. And when they wanted the preacher removed, they didn't tell anybody else, they just told the preacher, hoping that he would resign and that no one would ever find out why he tendered his resignation. What do you think the preacher did? Called the congregation and said, "Are you aware of this?" And of course, the congregation wasn't aware of it, so they were pretty upset when they found out that men are usurping authority. This chapter ought to get some people's attention. Not just the manner of death, which of course always gets our attention. You know, they're swallowed up alive, went down into the pit. Man, what a way to go. But man, what's the sin that they're being punished for? That's what gets my attention. And of course, the sin is usurping authority. Rejecting God's choice is another good way of saying it. It doesn't surprise me if you don't know off the top of your head. Doesn't surprise me what's in chapter 17. Chapter 17 is Aaron's rod that buds. Because we're not done with authority yet. You want to play around with authority? Okay, we're going to make it, we're going to give you another story that should cement the idea of authority in your mind. Verse 1, chapter 17. Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and get from them a rod from each father's house. All their leaders, according to the father's houses, 12 rods. Write each man's name on his rod. And you shall write Aaron's name on the rod of Levi. For there shall be one rod for the head of each father's house. Then you shall place them in the tabernacle of meeting before the testimony where I meet with you. And it shall be that the man whom I choose will blossom. Or excuse me, it shall be that the rod of the man whom I choose will blossom. Thus I will rid myself of the murmurings of the children of Israel, which they murmur against you. So Moses spoke to the children of Israel, and each of their leaders gave him a rod apiece. For each leader, according to their father's houses, 12 rods, and the rod of Aaron's was among their rods. Moses placed the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle of witness. Now it came to pass on the next day, Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted, put forth buds, and had produced blossoms, and yielded ripe almonds. Then Moses brought out all the rods from before the Lord to the children of Israel, and they looked, and each man took his rod. And the Lord said to Moses, bring Aaron's rod back before the testimony, to be kept as a sign against the rebels, that you may put their murmurings away from before me, lest they die. Thus did Moses, just as the Lord had commanded him. So he did. And the children of Israel spoke to Moses, saying, surely we die, we perish, we all perish. Whoever comes near the tabernacle of the Lord must die. Shall we all utterly die? So obviously, here's another sign. And what were the three things that were contained in the Ark of the Covenant?
Tablets, showbread.
Not showbread. In the Ark of the Covenant, not in the tabernacle. Manna and the Ten Commandments. Yeah. 10 Commandments, there's the law. God directs, if you will, the manna, God provides, and of course, the Aaron's rod, God authorizes. And so it should that should put the question of authority to bed once and for all. Chapter 19, once again, he is enumerating some of the things of the priesthood that we have already gone over. Some of them, not all of it, but once again, he talks about how the Levites and the Kohathites are supposed to live off of the tithes of the people. He's, of course, the principle that comes into the New Testament is that, as Paul said, that a man who sows spiritual things has a right to reap your carnal things. That is a principle that's well planted in the law of Moses. How did the priests and the Levites, how did they make their living? Or how were they provided for? Tithes of the people that came their way. And so we've been through most of that before, so I'm not going to worry about any of the do's and don'ts of chapter 18, because once again, he's being repetitive because we got another generation that's taking over. Chapter 19, purification of the red heifer. We won't read the whole chapter, but let's just read a few verses, get the idea what's going on. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, this is the ordinance of the law which the Lord has commanded, saying, speak to the children of Israel. They bring you a red heifer without blemish, in which there is no defect, and on which a yoke has never come. Shall give it to Eleazar the priest. May take it outside the camp, and shall be slaughtered before him. Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger, sprinkle it of its blood 7 times directly in front of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the heifer shall be burned in his sight, its hide, flesh, blood, offal shall be burned. The priest shall take cedar wood, hyssop, scarlet, cast them into the midst of the fire, burning the heifer. Then the priest shall wash his clothes, he shall bathe in water, and afterwards he shall come into the camp. The priest shall be unclean until evening. One who burns it shall wash his clothes in water, bathe in water, and shall be unclean until evening. Then the man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and store them outside the camp in a clean place. And there they shall be kept for the congregation, for the children of Israel. For it is the water of purification. It is for purifying one from sin. Verse 11. He who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with water on the 3rd day, on the 7th day. Then he will be clean. And we'll stop reading right there. But what's the law of the red heifer for? Take the ashes and put it in water, and they would keep the water. And if you touched a dead body, you would have to present yourself to the priest and be washed on the 3rd day, and then washed again on the 7th day. One thing that mankind has always known, the law of Moses emphasizes it right here in this chapter: death. Since Adam and Eve, I'm sure death has been associated with uncleanness, and of course all you got to do is watch somebody die and come back a couple of days later, and you understand why it's unclean. But anyways, the Jews, of course, like every other people, needed to be aware of how to deal with the fact that you might have come in contact with a dead body, and the purification of the red heifer was how they were purified from coming in contact with a dead body, something that would happen to you occasionally. And of course, nation of 3 million people, probably happened quite a bit, over 3 million people. So the law of the purification of the red heifer is for that purpose of when you come in contact with a dead body. So yes, that's all I really want you to know from that chapter. Chapter 20. And I wrote next to verse 1 there, the wandering is over. We are in the last year of the wilderness wandering. Chapter 14 is when the sentence was pronounced. By chapter 20, we're in the 39th year, which goes to show you that God didn't have a whole lot to say about the Jews in the wilderness wandering. Verse 1, this is kind of a interesting verse. Then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the 1st month, and the people stayed in Kadesh. And Miriam died there and was buried there. And what do I mean by interesting? Miriam's kind of a big deal, isn't she? Just one verse. Miriam dies, and that's it. It seems almost curt as far as who Miriam is, historically speaking. And I really don't know how to interpret that other than an awful lot of women don't even get mentioned. But Miriam at least got mentioned by name. But it seems a little strange that someone so...
She wouldn't really mention much after she initially rebelled.
She, now notice, of course we haven't read it yet, that's at the end of this chapter. But Who's the three biggest names in Israel? Moses, Aaron, Miriam. None of them would eventually see the promised land. Here's Miriam dying before she gets to the promised land, and of course she's got a few sins on her ledger as well. But anyways, overall was a good woman, and here she dies in Kadesh in the 39th year. I think yeah, there it is, in the first month. So anyways, the older generation is about gone, even though we don't notice it, but the young generation has grown up and is about ready to take over. And of course, here is the famous sin of Moses. They kept him from the promised land. Verse 2, there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and Aaron. People contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we'd died when our brethren died before the Lord. Why have you brought up the congregation of the Lord into the wilderness, that we and our animals should die here? Why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink. So Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. They fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod, you and your brother, Aaron, gather the assembly together, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rocks, and give drink to the congregation and their animals. Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him, and Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. And he said to them, hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me, to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. This was the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was hallowed among them. What is Aaron's sin Moses' sin, if I was to ask you on the test?
He did not believe God and how it was honor that he deserved. He just spoke to God, they struck the rock instead of speaking to it. And he also said, must we?
That's the one I really wanted you to know. Must we? Look again at verse 9, last sentence. Must we bring water for you out of this rock? I think Moses, yeah, go ahead, Damien. What's that?
He didn't treat God as holy.
He's human. He's flawed. He's elevating himself to him and God are performing this good work. Be careful. It's wonderful if you are a good servant of the Lord. And people like you and respect you, and honors are given to you. Responsibilities are given to you. But as C.S. Lewis once said, and I like the way he said it, he said, if you do a good job for people and they're pleased and they tell you that they're happy with you, is there anything wrong with being happy about that? Yeah, I tried to do a good job, and turns out the people said I did. I feel good. He said there's a difference between being pleased or being happy because you've been useful, and suddenly thinking, I must be a great guy for having done it. You start getting puffed up with pride. Enough people tell you you're great, and you start thinking you're great. And you have to be very careful. It's nice to be honored and recognized among your fellow men, particularly if you deserve it, because you've been useful and helpful to them. But be careful that you don't get puffed up with pride. Even Moses temporarily forgot himself there. God's providing the rock, Moses. You're not. But must we? That word really jumps out at me. But yes, obviously the answer is God told him to speak to the rock, and Moses struck the rock. But I'm particularly mindful of that word in verse 10. Must we bring water for you out of this rock? So I think Moses temporarily got a little puffed up, which of course does not hallow God. When you start thinking you and him are doing something, because God is doing it, he's simply using you as a instrument in his hands. So, verses 14 through 21, Jews are trying to get in place to actually take the promised land, which requires them to pass by Edom. Now Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardships that has befallen us, how our fathers went down to Egypt, and we dwelt in Egypt a long time. And the Egyptians afflicted us and our fathers. And we'll stop right there for a second. We'll talk about the nature of faith for a minute. Who's Edom? Or let me rephrase that. Who founded the nation of Edom? You're close. Edom is Esau. When Esau obviously Jacob stole his blessing, deceived him. Esau went off and built Edom. Obadiah, by the way, the minor prophet, is actually preaching to Edom. Edom had, they were nomads, basically. They lived south of the promised land. But Petra was, I believe, their capital city, or it might have been Seir. Those are two prominent cities. I think it was Petra. But they basically carved dwellings into the stones. I mean, they lived in the mountains, and they were very prideful and puffed up, not thinking that anybody could touch them because they were so militarily well situated. And God said, I'll bring you down, and he did. But here's my point. Did Esau know that Jacob had his blessing? Yeah, he did. Wanted to kill him. When he came back, remember Jacob's mother, Rachel, sent him away because she was afraid, or actually Jacob's mother, Rebecca, sent him away because she was afraid Esau was going to kill him. And Esau would have killed him. When Esau came back, remember how Jacob set up barriers, trying to figure out whether Esau was going to kill him or not? Turns out he hugged and kissed him and treated him like a brother. Why did he do that? Why didn't Esau come back and want to kill Jacob? Because he had all this world's goods. Esau, of course, the Hebrew writer said he was profane. What do we mean by profane? He only cared about worldly things. By the time he saw Jacob, he had all the possessions he could possibly want. So even though he didn't like what his brother had done to him, apparently he was living large. And that was all he cared about. Well, he dies, but his nation, Edom, is a great nation. What happened to Israel? Went down into Egypt, nation of slaves. Can you imagine for 400 years? You might scratch your head once in a while and say, I thought Jacob stole Esau's blessings. Sure looks like Esau's got them to me. Took God 400 years before that promise looked real. For 400 years, I imagine, by the time of the book of Exodus came along, I imagine Israel's faith was on life support because Edom is doing great. Israel's a nation of slaves. Who's been blessed by God? That's why we have to walk by faith and not by sight. But anyways, Edom is the nation founded by Esau, which means they are the closest nation on earth to Israel. They're founded by the twin brother of Jacob. Now Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel. That's why he calls him your brother. Thus says your brother Israel. You know all the hardship that has befallen us. How our fathers went down into Egypt, dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians afflicted us and our fathers. When we cried out to the Lord, he heard our voice, sent the angel, brought us up out of Egypt. Now here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your border. Please let us pass through your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from wells. We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory. Then Edom said to him, you shall not pass through my land, lest I come out against you with the sword. So the children of Israel said to him, we will go by the highway, and if I or my livestock drink any of your water, then I will pay for it. Only let me pass through on foot, nothing more. Then he said, you shall not pass through. So Edom came out against them with many men and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his territory. So Israel turned away from him. So it would have been easier to pass through Edom because Edom is south. And remember, they're coming from Egypt, so coming up south would have been easier, but Edom wouldn't let them. In the book of Deuteronomy, we will see that God specifically tells Israel not to do anything to Edom because they are brothers. But by the time of Obadiah, God's about had enough of the Edomites, and he pronounces destruction on them. Their destruction didn't come all at once. Herod was an Edomite. They're called Idumeans by that point in history, but it was a cross section between Edom and Israel. And so he had some Jewish blood, but he was also, the Herods were also Edomites in their background. So anyways, Edom, nation of Esau, brother nation, should have treated Israel like a brother, and they did not. Verse 22. Then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, journeyed from Kadesh and came to Mount Hor. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor by the border of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land which I have given to the children of Israel, because you rebelled against my word at the water of Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son and bring them up to Mount Hor. And strip Aaron of his garments, put them on Eleazar his son, for Aaron shall be gathered to his people and die there. So Moses did just as the Lord commanded, and they went up to Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. Moses stripped Aaron of his garments and put them on Eleazar his son, and Aaron died there on the top of the mountains. And Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. Now when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, all the house of Israel mourned for Aaron 30 days. Generally speaking, the amount of mourning was based on how renowned you were, how much respect they had for you. So obviously Aaron, the first high priest, was greatly respected. A flawed man. We know what his flaws were, but still a good man, and Israel mourned him for 30 days. Phrase I like that we see quite a bit in Scripture, and we're seeing it here. I think it's 3 times in this story. Gathered to his people. What does that mean?
It means that they died.
What's that?
It means that they died.
Yeah, I think it means more than that, though. And this is what I mean by that phrase. I admit, it's not explicit, but I think it's buried in there because, again, we know a little bit more because we're Christians and we go back and read this. Gathered to his people sounds like there's some fellowship involved in that. What do we know about what happens after we die?
Paradise, either in Abraham's bosom or
In torments. Well, it's always been the case. We just didn't learn it until the New Testament time. But gathered to his people, I think veiled in that description is fellowship after death. Gathered to your people. Now, some people that don't look at it that way probably just think it means, well, he got buried. Maybe he's buried next to his family or whatever, like Abraham and Sarah were buried in the cave of Machpelah. But I think there's probably more in it than that. Yeah. I've been kind of surprised that how many people believe in what we call soul sleeping. What is soul sleeping?
soul sleep.
What does that mean when I say the phrase soul sleeping?
Just when you die, your soul is sleeping and it's not doing anything, it's not conscious or anything else until the resurrection.
Basically, you're unconscious until the resurrection. Damien?
And anything like purgatory?
No, because purgatory, you're alive and awake. I know Jehovah's Witnesses believe it, but there's members of the church that believe it, or at least they're fuzzy about it. But yeah, the idea that when you die, you're just basically unconscious until the resurrection. You know, I don't know how Jesus, I'm not sure what they do with the passage, this day you will be with me in paradise. I know what they do with the story of Luke or the story in Luke of the rich man and Lazarus. What do they do with that story? Well, it's just a parable. Is Luke or the rich man and Lazarus, is that a parable or not? I'm sorry?
Parable to it. It's a rich man with Deut.
Actually, since I'm not going to be able to get any more done, let's just go ahead and close the night by looking at that. Look at Luke 16. Luke 16, verse 19. There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, fared sumptuously every day. But there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, full of sores, who was laid at his gate. Some people say it's not a parable. Do you know why? I don't think there's another parable that Jesus tells where he gives anybody's name. So based on the fact that Lazarus is named, some people just fall on the side of this is an actual story. But here's the point. It's not just Jehovah's Witnesses. There are other people that believe in soul sleeping. I think Seventh-day Adventists do too, but don't quote me on that. But when you try to tell them, well, if soul sleeping is true, what about the story of the rich man and Lazarus? Their response will be, well, that's a parable. You know what I say to that when somebody says? First of all, I don't know if it's parable or not, but even if it's parable, parables are designed to teach something. What's the parable teach? It teaches consciousness after death. And so, you know, remember what we're operating on, gathered to his people. And so, to me, it does not matter whether it's a parable or not. Either way, it's still teaching the same thing, consciousness after death. But as long as we're here, desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table, moreover the dogs came and licked his sores. So it was, the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. Stop right there for a minute. I've got carried by the angels highlighted. Why suppose I highlighted that? By the way, Damien, we're starting Jeremiah tomorrow. Here's one of your memory verses. 10:23. O Lord, the way of a man is not in himself. It is not in man that walks to direct his own steps. And why is that a memory verse? Because if we're going to get to heaven, we're going to need some help. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. Angels carried the rich man or the beggar to Abraham's bosom. Verse 20. I also like the way that verse 22 ends. The rich man also died and was buried. That's it. Rich man died and was buried. And being in torments in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, they may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. You know what's I noticed that's not in that verse? Father Abraham, let me out of here. I suppose he doesn't ask that question. Because somehow he knows you can't leave. He asks Lazarus to come over and help him, but he doesn't ask to leave himself. Abraham said, Son, remember. By the way, I have a theory. I can't prove it. You know what my theory is? Day of judgment, we will all remember every day of our lives. There will be no moment of your life that you can't recall at the blink of an eye, like a computer. Just hit the button and there's the document you wrote 5 years ago, verbatim. I think you'll know every day of your life. You know why I think that's important? Remember. You know what you're going to find out on the day of judgment? Man, God's been preaching to me every day of my life. I just wasn't listening. You ever been sitting in a restaurant and there's a conversation at the table that you're not really trying to listen to, but you can't help it? Man, they're talking about, I need to hear this conversation. You guys preaching right at me. I need to repent based on these two people that don't even know me. I remember once listening to I fell asleep in front of the TV. And you know how you're in that conscious, unconscious state where you're hearing what's going on TV? Man, they were preaching right at me on the TV. And it wasn't a religious program, but I mean, preachers are everywhere. God is constantly calling the sinner to repentance. He's just not listening. Well, if there's any truth to the theory that you will recall every day of your life, you're going to see how often God gave you the opportunity to repent. Don't tell me you didn't know what I wanted you to repent of. I sent prophet after prophet after prophet into your life. You just weren't paying attention. You weren't listening. You had other things to do. Remember. Remember, in your lifetime, you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he's comforted, you are tormented. Besides all this, between us, there's a great gulf fixed, which, by the way, should do away with purgatory. But those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. And he said, I beg you, therefore, Father, that you would send into my father's house 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. You know, it gets me about verses 27 and 28. Finally, you want to do some evangelism. Didn't care about evangelism in the lifetime, but now it's too late. Be ready to go preach, have your brothers preach to. Abraham said to him, they have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, no, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to them, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rise from the dead. Brethren, it took me forever to read that passage and believe it. And I remember thinking the first time I read that, I don't believe it. But I feel mighty uncomfortable disagreeing with Abraham. And whenever your position is the opposite of Abraham, you might want to stop and think about it. But still, that always bothered me. You know why it bothered me? Because if I saw somebody dead or went to their funeral, 3 days later, there they are standing in front of me, I'd listen to them. It's hard to believe what Abraham says there. And if they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to believe somebody resurrected from the dead. And I stopped and thought, 2 things come to my mind. Number 1, the power of some people's agenda. The other Lazarus in John chapter 11, Jesus raises. Anybody remember what some of the people that witnessed that did? They went back to the Pharisees and said, guess what Jesus has done now? He raised Lazarus from the dead. He's been dead 4 days. Jesus raised him. What did the Jews immediately plot? Just saw a resurrection. What's their immediate reaction? Let's kill him. And the second thing I would point out to you is, you and I believe in a resurrection, and we've never seen one. So it doesn't take much. You know, if we actually saw somebody resurrected, would that double our faith? Yeah, it would. But you and I don't need to see a resurrection to believe in one. Some people are so wicked that even if they saw a resurrection, would figure out a way to deny it, to explain it away. Anyways, I wished we'd got a couple chapters further, but we'll have to stop right there tonight. Brethren, I appreciate you tuning in tonight, and thank you for coming out in person. We will see you next week. I'll pick it up in chapter 21 there. Yeah. I already closed up my Bible, but yeah, we will see you next week. Yeah.